Jake was a soldier, one of many sent to fight a war he never fully understood. He had been trained for combat, not for diplomacy or emotional intelligence. His mission had gone wrong. He had underestimated the enemy the alien species known as the Vari, a powerful and ancient race that had been terrorizing the galaxy for centuries. Now, here he was, locked in a strange throne room, facing their queen. The throne room was enormous. The walls were made of a dark, metallic substance that seemed to absorb the light, leaving the space dim and intimidating. High above, strange symbols glowed faintly in a language Jake didn't recognize. At the far end of the room, a large throne sat on a raised platform where Jaren, the queen of the Vari, sat in regal silence. Jaren was a sight to behold. Her appearance was both majestic and terrifying. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her body covered in smooth, dark armor that shimmered in the low light. Her eyes glowed with an eerie, golden hue, and her long, silver hair cascaded down her back. The sharpness of her features, the elegance of her posture, and the power that radiated from her made it clear she was a queen, feared by many. Jake was bound to a chair, his wrists cuffed by cold, alien metal that prevented him from escaping. His mind raced as he tried to figure out how to escape, but there was no point in panicking. He needed to stay calm, stay smart. Human, Jaren's voice echoed in the room, deep and resonant. "Do you think I'm a monster?" Jake blinked, surprised by the question. He had expected threats, taunts, maybe even a declaration of war. But this was different. He looked up at her, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his heart race. At first, he didn't know how to answer. The queen's presence alone was enough to make anyone feel small, insignificant. Her reputation as a ruthless ruler was known throughout the galaxy. But as he studied her, Jake realized something. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, something he had not expected to see. Despite her fearsome appearance, she seemed unsure. "No," Jake said, his voice steady, but there was a hint of confusion in his words. "I don't think you're a monster." Jaren raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by his response. "And why is that?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost as if she hadn't fully expected such an answer. Jake shifted in his chair, trying to think. His mind told him that this was a trick, that he should be careful with his words, but something in Jaren's gaze made him speak from the heart. "I've seen monsters," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. "I've fought them. They don't ask questions like that. They don't care what others think." His tone was calm but firm. "You're not a monster. You're just someone who's been made to act like one." There was a pause, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the strange alien machines that filled the space. Jaren looked down at her hands, her fingers curled into fists, as if considering his words. Jake could tell she was not used to being challenged like this. Everyone else either feared her or obeyed her without question. But this humanness soldier was different. Jaren's golden eyes narrowed as she studied Jake. "You don't fear me?" she asked, her voice low, almost in disbelief. "No," Jake replied, shaking his head. "I don't fear you." Her lips curled slightly, as if she were trying to suppress a smile. It was a fleeting expression, but Jake saw it. It was a sign. She wasn't entirely sure what to make of him, but something about him intrigued her. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the tension between them thick. Jake was starting to feel the weight of his situation again. He was still a prisoner. His future was uncertain, and yet, for the first time since he had been captured, he didn't feel completely alone. There was something about the alien queen's presence that made him want to understand her, to learn more about her. "You humans are strange," Jaren finally said, breaking the silence. "You should fear me. My people fear me." "I'm not everyone," Jake said quietly. Maybe you don't need to be feared." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jaren's expression softened. She had been the queen of her people for centuries, a leader known for her strength and fearsome nature. But no one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever questioned her. "I don't think you understand, human," Jaren said. Her voice tinged with a trace of sadness. I was born to be a weapon. My people need me to be powerful. They need me to be ruthless. She stood up slowly, her tall form towering over Jake. I've never been allowed to be anything else. Jake watched her closely, feeling a strange connection to her words. He had been trained for war his entire life. He knew what it was like to be bound by duty, to be expected to be strong, to suppress every ounce of emotion in the name of victory. But Jaren, she had been forced into this role. Her people needed her to be something she wasn't. You don't have to be ruthless to be strong, Jake said quietly. Jaren froze, her gaze locking onto him once more. Her eyes, which had been hard and cold, softened just a little. And what makes you say that? Jake met her gaze, not flinching, not backing down. Because I've seen strong people who didn't need to crush others to prove it. You're more than just a weapon, Jaren. You just have to decide that for yourself. There was another long pause. For a brief moment, Jaren seemed lost. In thought, she had never been spoken to like this before. She had been a queen for so long, leading her people with power and fear. But Jake, this human soldier, who had been captured and beaten, dared to challenge her beliefs. Jaren lowered her gaze, the faintest of smiles tugging at the corners of her lips. For a brief moment, she didn't look like a queen at all. She looked like a person. Perhaps you're right, she murmured, more to herself than to Jake. Jaren walked to the far side of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Her thoughts were racing, and she could feel a knot tightening in her chest. She had been queen of the Vari for many years, but never had she felt so uncertain. She had always been the symbol of strength, the ruler who commanded respect with a glance. Yet here she was, standing in front of a human soldier who saw through her armor of power. A soldier who didn't fear her, but instead saw something more. Her people had always respected her. They feared her, yes, but respect and fear were not the same. Jaren was the queen because she had been born into this role. She was a weapon forged by the needs of her people. Her strength, her ability to lead, was what kept the Vari from tearing each other apart. She had to remain strong, unyielding, no matter the cost. But Jake had made her question everything. She turned slowly to face him, her golden eyes searching his face for any sign of weakness, of fear. But there was none. His calmness unsettled her. Most prisoners broke under pressure, begging for mercy or spilling secrets. But Jake, he remained silent, patient, and unafraid. Why? Jaren asked, her voice softer than it had been before. Why are you not afraid of me, human? Jake tilted his head, his gaze steady. Because I see a person, Jaren, not a monster, not a queen who demands fear, just a person who's been made to carry the weight of her people's expectations. The words hung in the air, and Jaren felt her chest tighten. No one had ever said anything like that to her. She had always been the ruler, the one in control. But in Jake's eyes, she was just a woman carrying a burden she couldn't bear alone. And it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. I was born to be powerful, Jaren said, her voice almost a whisper. She sat back down on her throne, her hands trembling slightly. My people depend on me. They look to me for guidance, for strength. If I show weakness, I fail them. I fail myself. Jake watched her carefully, his expression thoughtful. But maybe you're not failing them by showing who you really are. Maybe they need to see you, not just the queen they expect you to be. Jaren laughed bitterly, shaking her head. You don't understand. My people have always depended on my strength. If I show them anything less, they'll turn away from me. They'll see me as weak, as someone they can't follow. Jake leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but firm. But if you don't let them see you, if you hide who you really are, how can they trust you? How can they follow someone who never shows them their true self? Jaren fell silent, her eyes looking down at her hands, her mind racing. She had never questioned her leadership before. She had never allowed herself to doubt her role as queen. But now, after hearing Jake's words, she felt a crack in the walls she had built around herself. a crack she wasn't sure she wanted to ignore anymore. For so long, she had believed that strength meant hiding her feelings, her vulnerabilities. She had been taught that showing emotion was a weakness, that softness would be her downfall. But Jake, this human, saw through all of that. He had seen her for who she truly was, and instead of recoiling, he respected her more for it. Her thoughts were interrupted by Jake's voice, steady and calm. "You're not alone, Jaren," Jake said quietly. "You don't have to carry the weight of your people by yourself. Maybe it's time to let others help you." Jaren's gaze snapped up to meet his. She hadn't expected him to say that. Humans, to her knowledge, were quick to act alone, to fight battles with only their own strength. But here was Jake, offering something completely different. He was offering her a chance to be more than just a queen. He was offering her the chance to be herself. "I don't know how to trust anyone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was raised to lead, to never show weakness, to be alone in my power. I don't know if I can change that." Jake smiled softly, understanding the struggle that raged within her. "It's not about changing who you are. It's about allowing yourself to be who you truly are. Your people may fear you, but they also follow you. If you show them you're human too, they'll follow you even more." Jaren stood again, pacing slowly, her mind swirling with thoughts she had never allowed herself to entertain. Could she do it? Could she truly be the queen her people needed, not by being a perfect, unyielding figure, but by being real with them? She wasn't sure, but part of her felt something stir inside her, a small hope that maybe Jake was right. "I have been queen for so long," Jaren said, almost to herself, "and I have been alone for so long. I have always believed that strength meant standing apart. But now I don't know." Jake met her eyes, his expression warm but serious. "You can be strong and still be open. It's okay to let others in, Jaren." There was a long pause, and Jaren closed her eyes, her mind still grappling with the idea of vulnerability. It felt like a foreign concept to her, one she had rejected for years. But as she stood there, listening to the steady rhythm of Jake's breathing, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to strength than she had ever known. "You are strange, human," Jaren said softly, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "But perhaps you are right." Jake nodded, not pushing her, but allowing her to come to the conclusion on her own. "Maybe it's time for you to decide who you want to be, Jaren. Not just for your people, but for yourself." The room was quiet again, and Jaren felt a shift inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. It was as if, for the first time in her life, she was beginning to understand that being a leader didn't mean being perfect. It meant being real. She looked at Jake, her golden eyes meeting his, and for the first time, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a person, someone who had the courage to tell her the truth, even when it wasn't what she wanted to hear. "Thank you," Jaren said softly, her voice almost breaking. She didn't know if she could change overnight, but she knew one thing for certain. This human soldier had opened her eyes to a new possibility. The days that followed felt different. Jake and Jaren found themselves in a routine, though it was far from ordinary. As the queen's prisoner, Jake had expected to face harsh conditions and constant interrogation. Instead, he found himself spending hours in her presence, the two of them talking. Sometimes it was about the war, sometimes about the struggles of leadership, and sometimes it was simply silence. As they both reflected on the weight of their words, Jaren was not like the cold, calculating rulers Jake had heard about. She wasn't a monster, as many had said. She was a leader, bound by duty, a woman trapped by her role. But in these moments, he saw a different side of her. Her voice was softer when she spoke about her people, about the loneliness that came with her crown, and the expectations that kept her isolated. Jake was beginning to understand. She wasn't just a queen. She was a person who had been shaped by years of pressure, molded into something she didn't feel she could escape. And yet, in the quiet moments, there was a flicker of something else, something human. It was as if she was letting her walls down, just a little bit, and for Jake, that was enough to see her in a new light. He had stopped thinking of her as his captor, his enemy. In the silence of her throne room, they shared something rare, understanding. It wasn't a typical relationship between prisoner and queen. Jake wasn't afraid of her. And Jaren, despite her position, wasn't trying to intimidate him anymore. It was as if they were just two people trying to make sense of a universe. That seemed too big to understand. Jaren, too, was changing. She had never allowed herself to show this much vulnerability. It felt strange, even frightening. But as she spent more time with Jake, she realized something: she had never had anyone listen to her without judgment, without expectation. Most of the time, people saw her as a queen first, a ruler to be obeyed. But Jake had seen beyond that. He saw her as something more, and it made her feel lighter. In a way, one evening, after the day's conversations had quieted, Jaren stood at the window, gazing out at the stars. She had always found peace in looking at the vastness of space. It reminded her of the endless possibilities, of the freedom she had never known. Jake watched her from a distance. The way the light of the stars reflected off her silver hair made her seem even more regal. Yet there was something tender about her posture, something that made her seem smaller. It was strange, but he couldn't deny the connection he was feeling toward her. "You spend a lot of time looking at the stars," Jake said quietly, breaking the silence. He wasn't sure what prompted him to speak, but it felt like the right moment. "What do you see when you look at them?" Jaren didn't turn around, but she answered, "I see endless space, endless potential. I see the future of my people. And sometimes I wonder if they are better off without me." Jake frowned, sensing the weight of her words. "You really believe that? I have been their queen for so long." She said, her voice distant, "But I wonder if my rule has made them fear me. I wonder if they would be better off with someone else, someone who isn't so alone." Her words stung Jake's heart. He could see the loneliness she carried. She had been so focused on leading, on being the perfect ruler, that she had lost sight of the one thing she needed most: connection. He stood up and moved toward her, his steps quiet. When he was close enough, he spoke again, his voice soft but sincere. "Maybe you don't need to be perfect to be a good leader. Maybe you just need to let them see you for who you really are." Jaren turned her head slightly, glancing at him. "And what if they don't understand? What if they see me as weak?" Jake took a step closer. "They'll see someone who's brave enough to be real. They'll see a leader who isn't afraid to show her true self. And that's a leader worth following." Jaren looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face. She had never heard anyone speak to her like that. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to hide behind her armor anymore. Maybe she didn't have to be the perfect queen. Maybe she could just be herself. "I've spent so long trying to hide who I am," she admitted quietly, afraid of showing weakness, afraid of being seen as a human. Jake smiled softly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "You don't have to hide, Jaren. We all have our weaknesses. We all have our moments of doubt. It's what makes us human." Jaren felt a strange warmth in her chest. She had always feared that showing weakness would make her unworthy of her throne. But Jake's words felt like a lifeline, something she had been searching for but never knew she needed. "Maybe she didn't have to be alone in this. I don't want to be a monster," she said, almost to herself. "I just want to be a good queen. I want my people to understand that I'm trying to help them, but I don't know how." "You're already doing it," Jake replied gently. "You're trying, and that's enough." Jaren's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever said that to her before. Everyone else had only expected results, perfection. But Jake was different. He was offering her something priceless: understanding, support, and the freedom to be herself. She turned fully to face him, her golden eyes meeting his with a softness that surprised them both. You're not like the others, are you?" Jake shook his head slowly. "No, I'm not. I think there's more to you than just the queen. I think you're someone who's just been waiting to be seen. And I see you, Jaren." Her chest tightened as she looked at him, and for the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long, a sense of connection. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Thank you, Jake, Jaren said quietly. You've given me something I didn't even know I needed. Jake gave a small nod, his expression warm. You don't have to thank me. I'm just saying what's obvious. You're more than what you've been forced to be. Jaren smiled softly, a rare and genuine smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something other than the weight of her crown. She felt hope. As the days passed, Jaren found herself thinking about Jake more than she had expected. It was strange. She had never allowed herself to think about anyone other than her people, her duties as queen. Yet, the human soldier, her captive, had managed to break through the walls she had built around herself. And now, she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet moments they had shared. It wasn't just his words that lingered with her. It was the way he looked at her. There was no fear in his eyes, only understanding and, strangely, something else: respect. He saw her for who she was, not just the queen. And that made her feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Jaren stood at the window once more, staring out at the stars. The night sky, so familiar and vast, had always been a source of comfort for her. But now, it felt different, as if the very stars were telling her that the universe was not as cold and unforgiving as she had always believed. Jake entered the room quietly, his footsteps barely audible on the cold floor. He had noticed the change in Jaren over the past few days. The walls she had once kept so carefully in place were beginning to crumble, just a little. He could see it in the way she moved, in the way she spoke, in the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. He knew she was still struggling. She had always been the queen, the one in control, the one everyone depended on. But he also knew that no one could carry that weight forever, not without help. And in some small way, he had offered her that help. He had listened when no one else had, and for the first time in a long while, Jaren had allowed herself to trust someone else. Jaren turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. I've been thinking, she began, her voice hesitant, about what you said, Jake, about being real, about not hiding behind my position as queen. Jake smiled softly, stepping closer. I'm glad you're thinking about it, but remember, Jaren, you don't have to change everything overnight. Change takes time. Jaren sighed, her eyes dropping to the floor. I know, but sometimes I wonder if I'm too far gone. I've been a queen for so long, Jake. My people have always looked to me for strength, for guidance. What if they don't accept me if I show them who I really am? Jake stepped forward, gently lifting her chin so that she looked at him. You won't know until you try. They're your people, Jaren. They trust you, but they also need to see the real you, not just the queen they've always known. Jaren closed her eyes for a moment, his words sinking in. The weight of her crown felt heavier than it ever had before. She had been carrying it for so long, but now, for the first time, she felt like she might be able to lay it down, even if just for a moment. I've always believed that strength comes from power, she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. That if I show any weakness, I would be seen as unworthy of my throne. Jake shook his head gently. Strength isn't about power, Jaren. It's about being honest, about being real. You don't have to hide who you are to be strong. You can still be a leader, but you can also be yourself. Jaren looked up at him, her golden eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and hope. But what if they see me as weak? What if they don't follow me anymore? Jake smiled, a comforting warmth in his gaze. They'll follow you because you're you. They'll follow you because you care about them, and because you're brave enough to be who you are. Jaren swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent so long trying to live up to the expectations of others, trying to be something she wasn't. But Jake was offering her something she had never allowed herself to consider: freedom. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted quietly. I've been a queen for so long, Jake. I've always had to be strong, to be perfect. I don't know how to be anything else. Jake placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. And that's enough. Jaren looked at him, her heart racing. for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't have to carry the burden of perfection anymore. Maybe she could be the queen her people needed, not by being flawless, but by being true to herself. You've given me something I never thought I could have, Jaren said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Hope. I thought I had lost it a long time ago. But now I feel like I might have a chance to be something more than just a queen. Jake smiled warmly, his eyes filled with understanding. You are more than just a queen, Jaren. You're a person, just like everyone else, and that's what makes you strong. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling between them. Jaren felt a shift within herself, a small but significant change. She had always believed that her role as queen defined her, but now, for the first time, she was beginning to understand that being herself could be just as powerful, if not more so. I don't know what will happen when I go back to my people, Jaren said, her voice filled with uncertainty. But I do know one thing. I don't have to do this alone. Jake's smile widened. No, you don't, and you never will. Jaren nodded slowly, her heart lightening for the first time in years. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew now that she didn't need to. She had a chance to lead her people, not by being perfect, but by being real. And that, she realized, was enough. The days had been quiet, but in that silence, Jaren felt a stirring inside her that she couldn't ignore. The weight of the crown she had worn so long was starting to feel lighter. The expectations of her people, once so heavy, now seemed less daunting. She had spent so much of her life hiding behind power and fear. But Jake, this human soldier, had shown her that there was another way. A way that didn't require perfection, but honesty and trust. Still, there was one question that lingered in the back of her mind. It had been there since the moment they first spoke. When she had asked Jake if he thought she was a monster, his answer had been simple and direct, but it had stayed with her. Now, more than ever, she needed to understand. Jaren stood by the window once again, looking out into the endless expanse of space. Her golden eyes were lost in the stars, and for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of being a queen. She felt free in a way she hadn't in years. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't the oppressive kind. It was the kind of silence that made her think, made her reflect. Jake was sitting quietly at the far end of the room, reading through old records that had been left in the room for him. He had noticed the change in Jaren, too. She was more relaxed now, her sharp edges softened. The queen who had once been distant and imposing was now someone he could talk to, someone who seemed human. She had become more than just a ruler. To him, she had become someone he could trust. Jaren turned toward him, her expression serious. But there was something else in her eyes, curiosity, perhaps uncertainty. She needed to ask him to understand the truth of what she was feeling. Jake, she called softly, and he looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers. I need to ask you something. Jake put the records down, giving her his full attention. Of course. What is it? Jaren took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had never asked anyone this before. In fact, she had never allowed herself to ask it, but something about the way Jake had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, it made her feel like it was okay to ask. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind her position as queen, to let herself be vulnerable. Do you still think I'm a monster? Jaren asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her golden eyes searched his face, waiting for an answer. Jake's expression softened immediately, his eyes full of understanding. He had known this question was coming. Jaren had always carried herself with strength and authority, but beneath that, he could see the doubt she was struggling with. She wanted to know if he still saw her as the terrifying ruler, the one everyone feared, or if he saw something else. He stood up slowly, walking toward her until he was standing beside her. No, he said simply, his voice steady. I never thought you were a monster, Jaren. I told you that before, and I meant it. Jaren's breath caught in her throat. His answer was exactly what she had hoped for, yet it still felt strange. She had spent so long convincing herself that her strength, her power, was what defined her. But Jake, he had seen her for who she truly was, and he didn't see a monster. He saw a person. Then what do you see? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. If not a monster, then what am I? Jake looked at her, his eyes sincere. I see someone who's been carrying a lot of weight for too long. Someone who's had to hide who they really are in order to be seen as strong. But I also see someone who's beginning to understand that they don't have to carry that burden alone. Someone who's learning to be real, to trust others, and that takes a lot of strength, Jaren. More than just power ever could. Jaren blinked, her heart racing as she processed his words, his kindness, his understanding. It made something stir deep within her. For the first time, she felt like someone truly saw her, not just as the queen, but as herself. But what if my people don't understand? Jaren asked, her voice full of uncertainty. What if they reject me when they see who I really am? What if they see me as weak? Jake shook his head. Jaren, they followed you because of who you are, not because of the power you hold over them, but because of your heart. You've been leading them all along, even when you didn't know it, and showing them who you truly are, being honest about your struggles. That will make them trust you even more. That's what real leadership is. Jaren took a step back, her mind racing. Jake's words were powerful. He was offering her something she had never considered. Freedom, not just for her people, but for herself. The freedom to be real, to be vulnerable, and to still lead. She had always believed that to be strong, she had to hide her true self. But now, for the first time, she was beginning to understand that strength came from showing her true self. I've never allowed myself to be vulnerable before, Jaren admitted softly. I've never allowed myself to be anything other than the queen they needed me to be. But now I'm not so sure. Jake smiled gently. You don't have to be perfect, Jaren. You just have to be yourself, and that's enough. Jaren looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. She had always feared that showing weakness would make her unworthy of her crown. But now she realized that it was exactly the opposite. By showing her true self, by being vulnerable, she could lead in a way that was more real, more powerful than she had ever imagined. She smiled, a small but genuine smile, her golden eyes reflecting the newfound understanding. Maybe, you're right. Maybe it's time for me to let go of the mask I've been wearing. Jake gave a small nod. It's never easy, but you don't have to do it alone. And you don't have to be afraid of what others might think. Jaren felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She still wasn't sure of everything, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. She had spent so long being the queen they expected her to be, but now, she was ready to be the queen her people needed and the person she needed to be. Thank you, Jake, Jaren said quietly. I didn't think I could change, but now, I think I can. Jake smiled, his eyes warm. You already have? The days continued to pass in a quiet rhythm. The once imposing throne room now felt less like a place of power, and more like a space of understanding. Jaren found herself looking at the world differently. No longer did the weight of her crown feel like an unshakable burden. No longer did she feel forced to be something she wasn't. With Jake's support, she was beginning to see that she didn't have to be perfect to lead. She could be real, vulnerable, and still be strong. But even as Jaren embraced this new way of thinking, doubts lingered in the back of her mind. Her people had always seen her as a symbol of strength, the fearsome queen who ruled with an iron fist. How would they react when they saw the woman behind the crown? Would they still follow her? Or would they see her as weak? Jake, who had been by her side through this transformation, could see the uncertainty still clouding her eyes. He understood. Change was never easy, especially when it meant breaking free from a lifetime of expectations. He had seen her grow over the past weeks, from a ruler bound by her duties to a woman discovering her own strength through honesty and trust. Now, it was time for her to take the final step into the unknown. Jaren stood in front of the large, curved mirror in her chambers, her reflection staring back at her. She wasn't the same person who had entered this room weeks ago. Her face had softened. The lines of worry that once marked her features now replaced with a more confident, peaceful expression. She had let go of the fear that had defined her for so long, and now she was ready to face her people not as a monster or a perfect ruler, but as herself. "You've come a long way." Jake's voice broke the silence behind her, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway. His expression was warm, his eyes filled with quiet support. "Are you ready?" Jaren took a deep breath. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, she didn't need to. She had come to realize that leadership wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to stand with her people. "Not above them. I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Though she could feel the nerves bubbling inside her, she wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she could face it without fear. Jake nodded, his expression proud. "You've got this, Jaren. You're not alone anymore." Jaren smiled at him, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Jake, for everything. I don't think I could have done this without you." "You don't need to thank me," Jake replied, his smile matching hers. "You've always had the strength inside you. I just helped you see it." Together, they walked through the corridors of the ship, making their way toward the command center. Jaren's heart beat faster with each step. She had led her people through countless battles, but this was different. Today, she wasn't leading with fear or strength alone. Today, she was leading with honesty, with the truth of who she was. As they entered the command center, the room fell silent. Her advisors and the high-ranking officers of her fleet looked up at her, their faces a mix of respect and curiosity. Jaren could feel the weight of their gazes. But this time, she didn't shrink under them. She stood tall, her back straight, her eyes unwavering. "We need to talk," Jaren said, her voice firm, but softer than it had been in the past. There was no grand speech, no demand for attention, just a simple statement about the future of the Vari. One of the advisors, a tall, armored figure, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we are ready to hear your command." Jaren took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be a queen, about what it means to lead. I've spent my life trying to be something I'm not, something I thought I had to be in order to rule. But I've come to realize that strength doesn't come from fear. It comes from being honest with myself and with you." The room was quiet, no one daring to interrupt. Jaren could see the confusion in their eyes, but she also saw something else: curiosity. They were waiting for her to continue, to show them who she truly was. "I've led you as a queen," she continued, her voice growing steadier. "But I want to lead you as a person who makes mistakes, who learns, and who asks for your trust. We've fought many battles, but the greatest battle now is learning how to lead with kindness, with understanding, not with fear." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the advisors nodded, their faces softening. They didn't speak, but their silent acceptance was all Jaren needed. She had taken the first step toward leading differently, and they had seen her for who she was. "You are right, my queen," the advisor who had spoken earlier said, his voice respectful. "We have followed you because we trust you, and we will continue to follow you, not because of fear, but because of who you are." Jaren felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time, she realized that her people didn't need a perfect queen. They needed a real one, and by showing them her true self, she had earned their trust in a way she never could have by hiding behind her strength alone. "I'm not perfect," Jaren said quietly, her voice carrying through the room, "but I am here, and I will lead you with all that I am." The room erupted into applause, but it wasn't the kind of applause that came from fear or duty. It was genuine, the sound of people who respected their queen, not because of the power she held, but because of the person she had become. As the applause died down, Jake looked at Jaren, his expression filled with pride. She had done it. She had taken the hardest step, and in doing so, she had become the leader her people truly needed. Jaren turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his. "Thank you, Jake. You've helped me find my way." Jake smiled back, his voice filled with warmth. "You found it yourself, Jaren. I just helped you see it." Jaren smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt truly free, and as she looked out at her people, she knew that this was only the beginning. A new path had opened before her, one filled with challenges. Yes, but also with the promise of something greater. She wasn't just a queen anymore. She was Jaren, a leader, a person, and someone who was ready to face the future, not as a monster, but as someone real.